Copacetic by Justin Norris, narrated by Toby Turner. Here, time was impossible to determine, because in this room, this dim, massive cathedral of a room, there were no windows, no clocks, only walls, and on those walls, hundreds of reflective steel panels so convincingly created the illusion of eternity. But that was the point. Ascari's intent behind the design had always been to personify Anura's ultimate purpose. If one were to stop and gaze at his or her reflection, a never-ending succession of duplicates would be staring back, all possessing the same expressions, the same gestures, the same emotions, fears, yearnings, and experiences. A reminder that there was always another. In this room, each member was reminded of what they stood for and why they served as a child of Anura. And on this night, the team convened once more, gazing upon their thousand selves within the steel walls, just as they were required to do before every assignment, cultivating the confidence to bring others home safely, the millions of others currently lost in chaos. Bold green text appeared on the large projector screen affixed to the balcony above the golden elevator, and yet again, the alarm sounded. 3 separate, rapid vibrations shook the mirrored walls, and the team turned to the screen, eagerly waiting for the digital text to finish crawling. Name, Jeremiah Drake. Age, 31. Sex, M. Location, Orcasai. Alert level, stage 5 of 10. Prior alerts, 2. Ascari stepped onto the gold-plated platform in the center of the room, and the children of Anura rose from their seats to face him. Ascari read the candidate's profile aloud with a powerful and prominent voice, each utterance echoing over the next. Jeremiah Drake's image faded onto the screen as the details of his history were unveiled. Once finished, Ascari adjusted the pin on his uniform, turned to face his team, and raised his eyebrows. Time to go to work. "3%. 3. The number leered back from the screen as if it were mocking him. 2 gaping mouths huddled together, backs turned, obnoxious jeering engaging him at full throat. With the simple click of an email, all of the attempts at standing up to the district immediately became meaningless. This is what started it all. The raise, if that's what you want to call it anyway. Jeremiah slammed the laptop shut, startling the students while they watched the clock, waiting patiently for the bell to ring. The teachers did so much to fight for 12%, but this is all they ended up with. Who did the district think they were? Every day, teachers wore orange buttons or orange t-shirts to show their solidarity. Every lunch period on Fridays, they locked their doors to keep the students out. It wasn't because they wanted to, obviously. They had to show that their time was valuable and that they deserved better compensation for the time they constantly sacrificed, day in and day out, Jeremiah especially. 4 out of 5 days a week, ever since he started 4 years ago. Jeremiah's car was always the last one to leave the parking lot. Whether he was helping a student get caught up with missing assignments or talking with another about some boyfriend or girlfriend drama, Jeremiah was always there for his students. He was an educator, a mentor, a counselor, and for some, a father. But as time went on, he started to shut himself off to everyone around him, even Julianne. After all of her hospital bills, from the emergency visits to the chemo, life had become more about money than anything else. It was all they talked about, all they fought about, and now, the only one he could truly call his friend was one of his own students, Connor. As the bell rang for class to end, Jeremiah already had his bag packed, ready to run to his car and drive out to the beach. All day he'd been looking forward to listening to the waves and soaking in some sun. It wasn't San Diego, but it was better than nothing. This week couldn't have been more of a drag. "Any weekend plans, Mr. Drake?" Connor said, zipping up his backpack, which was clearly empty. Oh, the usual. Listen to my wife drone on about her next trip to South America or Australia or wherever while I delve into the exciting world of grading essays. You?
Wow, sounds fun,
Connor said. I'm probably just gonna get grounded for simply existing as soon as I get home, you know? Ain't it the life? Connor shook his head. You pick up the latest Dollar Underwater album yet? I've got bills stacked to the clouds. Are you sure? Or does your wife tell you what music you can and can't listen to? Jeremiah smirked. No, but I wouldn't be surprised if she started to. Connor laughed. Whipped. Get out of here with that. It'll happen to you too, you'll see. Soon you'll be answering back with, yes, dear, just like all of us old fogies. No, I'm never going to get married. Well, quit being such a loser and maybe you'll actually get a date one of these days, Jeremiah said as he mimicked Connor's laugh. You get any more sketches done? No, I've just been lazy. I might get back to it this weekend if I could get away from my dad for long enough. Hopefully I'll be able to stay with my mom instead. Definitely. I want to check out your new stuff whenever you feel like showing me. Cool. Yeah, if I finish anything, I'll show you on Monday. Sounds good, Connor. Have a good weekend, man. Yeah, right. You too, Mr. Drake. Connor threw his backpack over his shoulder, and Jeremiah sauntered to his desk to grab his car keys from the drawer. When he opened the classroom door, he couldn't believe his eyes. Another thunderstorm. The third one this week. You can't be serious right now, he said with a weary sigh. The rain pattered against the concrete like falling marbles. There was no way he'd be able to enjoy the beach now. He didn't care to walk back to his classroom to look for his umbrella, so he locked the door behind him and left. Students passed him in the hallway, some saying hi or nodding in acknowledgement. Jeremiah didn't give any sign of recognition. Colleagues waved goodbye through their car windows as they drove past, but he stayed rigid, his eyes forward. Soaked, Jeremiah unlocked his car, tossed his bag in the back, and plopped down in the driver's seat. He heaved a sigh, shoved the key in the ignition, and headbutted the steering wheel. Once, twice, 3 times. The rushing rivulets on the windshield concealed his sudden burst of frustration from any passerby. At least he thought. After the third thrust of his forehead, he gradually sat up, and Julianne entered his mind as he looked out the window. Connor, too. He searched his brain for a third person, but no one came to mind. Was it true? Was that it? Were they the only people he had? Oh well, like he needed anyone else anyway. Just another person to tell him what he was doing wrong. With Julianne's newfound respect for life, all she seemed to care about were butterflies and traveling. Her career was finally being given a chance to take off, sure, but it seemed as if they hardly talked anymore about their future. With money being as scarce as it was, the idea of raising a family had to be put on the back burner ever since he realized that he'd have to get a second job if a kid were to enter the picture. That just wasn't an option. He hardly cared about teaching anymore as it was, which wasn't exactly a gold mine. It was hard to care about anything, really, except the beach. But here he was, in the middle of another storm. So that wasn't happening. Jeremiah threw the car in reverse, turned his body, and immediately slammed on the brakes. Jesus Christ, get the hell out of the way! These kids, I swear. Someone was standing behind Jeremiah's car. The rain on the rear window made it difficult to see who it was exactly, but upon further inspection, it definitely wasn't a student. It was a grown woman wearing some kind of one-piece uniform. It wasn't one of the custodians, and it wasn't anyone from the administration. It wasn't anyone he recognized. Eventually, the woman slowly moved over, and Jeremiah was clear to back up. After getting a better view of her through the driver's side window, Jeremiah saw that she might be a school bus driver, trying to maintain order among the gaggle of students exiting campus. It was strange, however, because the woman's uniform was pristine, black, with a small shiny pin on the breast pocket. The woman, with somber eyes and an unblinking stare, had a noticeable pink scar that stretched all the way across her slender neck. "Take a picture, lady," Jeremiah said, under his breath. The woman wouldn't shake her eye contact with him. As Jeremiah eased his foot against the gas, she kept her eyes glued to Jeremiah as he drove away. Looking in his rearview mirror, Jeremiah kept his eyes on the woman as well. During the entire trip through the parking lot, she wouldn't budge. All the way past the driveway and down the street, the mysterious woman kept her eyes locked on Jeremiah's every move until he was no longer in the same field of view. Jeremiah swallowed and turned on the windshield wipers. "People are strange," he said, aloud, turning on the radio. "Who needs them?" Two. "Why aren't you more excited about this, Jeremiah?" Julianne asked, sitting at the dinner table with a huge encyclopedia on butterflies laying open next to her plate. "This is the pterodream we're talking about here, the rarest species of butterfly on Earth. So rare that the only proof of its existence is in one single photograph taken back in the 80s. Jeremiah, not caring to offer a response, continued to pick at his cold steak with his fork. "Are you even listening to me?" Jeremiah looked up from his plate. "Oh yeah, no, it's great, Jules. I really hope you find what you're looking for." All of this butterfly jargon was way over his head. The truth was, he couldn't care less. "Could you imagine what that would do for my career, for us, if I were the one to find it? This is some award-winning stuff here, honey." Julianne's words became inaudible strands of noise, and Jeremiah lost himself once again as he picked at his dried slab of sirloin. Julianne continued, "That's why I have to get on a plane first thing tomorrow morning after my appointment with Dr. Stocks. I have to be the first one to find it. Otherwise my chances just fly out the window." Silence lingered between the two. Jeremiah kept his head down. "Okay, you know what? Forget I said anything. You're obviously not listening to a word I say anyway." Jeremiah remained motionless. Julianne grabbed her dinner plate and stormed off from the table. When she reached the sink, she slammed her plate into it and raised her voice. "I don't understand. I mean, just 2 months ago, we got the best news either of us could have hoped for, and you can't even say a word to me at dinner? What's going on with you?" Still, Jeremiah showed no sign of acknowledgement. Julianne took a breath. She reached behind her neck with both hands and removed her necklace, gold interlaced with white pearls, and a small butterfly dangling from the center. It was her favorite, an anniversary gift. "I understand that you didn't get the raise that you've been wanting. I know it's frustrating, but I'm trying to actually enjoy my days again. A whole year I could barely even get out of bed, and now I have energy, Jeremiah. I can finally do what I love again. And you just don't give a shit about any of it. Why?" After a few moments of silence, Jeremiah showed signs of life as he watched her drape the necklace over the counter in the reflection of the living room mirror across from him. He pushed his chair back and stood up. Turning around, wiping his chapped lips with his napkin, he faced his wife. His shoulders slumped, his voice broken. Jeremiah responded to the interrogation. "I'll tell you why, one time. Then you need to get off my back." Julianne folded her arms and pushed her blonde bangs behind her ear. "I hate being at work. I hate being here. I hate that I work tirelessly every goddamn day and have nothing to show for it." Julianne looked down at her feet. "Is that it? Also, I hate living on the East Coast. I can't stand this constant rain, and why don't you seem to care that I'm the only one trying to take care of our bills? How can you actually have the nerve to get mad at me when I don't show the least bit of excitement about your damn butterflies every minute of every day? Because guess what? I don't give a shit, okay? I'm doing it all on my own, and now I just want to be left the hell alone." Julianne's arms fell to either side, and she stood expressionless. Her lips folded into a frown as Jeremiah stood patiently for any sort of response. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Jeremiah. Really, I am," she said, her voice weakening. "I'm sorry that you can't seem to see how much I care about you, about us, by working my ass off to make up for the fact that your school district doesn't give a shit about you or any of the other teachers working for them. No, I'm not making any money right now, but I'm trying to get back on my feet. Well, you need to try harder. A look of shock shot across her face. Wow, have you forgotten about all of the hell I've been through this year, Jeremiah? And apparently all you'd rather do is die alone in this awful place we built together? I really hope you can find something that gives you the strength to help you push yourself past this, whatever it is, because you are not the man I married. Julianne stormed past him as the tears rolled down her cheeks, with a vehement stare as she rushed to the bedroom. The door slammed from the other end of the hallway, resounding through the house, and Jeremiah stood up from the table, turning to face the refrigerator. The swarm of miniature pastel butterfly magnets on the freezer had caught his attention. Some were upside down, some sideways, and a portion of the transparent blue wing on one in particular was chipped off. Usually he'd take the time to adjust them when they'd get out of place like this, always cast into disarray by the crashing of the freezer door at the end of a heated argument. But this time, instead of rearranging them back into their usual delicate order, Jeremiah thrust his fist into the freezer, and the magnets dropped, collided with the tile, and shattered. The dented door hung agape on its incredulous hinges, and the frigid air spilled into the kitchen. Aside from the hum of the open freezer, the kitchen fell quiet. Jeremiah turned and caught his reflection in the living room mirror. He looked worn, stressed. He couldn't remember the last time he'd stopped to look at himself. The grays in his beard were prominent. His thinning brown hair hung over his eyebrows, matted with sweat across his forehead. He hardly recognized the man in the frame. Connor came to mind. He didn't know why. Perhaps he wanted to talk to him, or see him. It was an odd thing to think about in this moment. Nothing he hadn't thought before. Connor was the only one he'd felt close to anymore. It was simple as that. Since Julianne's diagnosis, normal conversation was something that fell by the wayside, as every conversation became about the cancer. But with Connor, he had someone to confide in, someone to talk about music with, about art and movies. And though he might be wrong, Jeremiah considered the feeling to be mutual. The evidence was there. For the past year, Connor had come into Jeremiah's classroom every day at lunch, even a few times after school. Would they converse much? Here and there in the beginning, but eventually, Connor became the one doing most of the talking. It got to a point where Jeremiah would often kick Connor out so he could eat lunch alone in his car, devoid of human contact. If the feeling were mutual, Jeremiah hadn't been much of a friend, and nowhere near the definition of a mentor, not like he was at first. Jeremiah shook the thought and turned away from the mirror. He clutched his hand and glanced at the cuts along his knuckles. He traced his fingers through the blood and walked through the hallway closet to grab a pillowcase to wrap his hand, something his mother always did for him when he'd get a cut or a scrape as a child. The closet was crammed with white bedding, and the sight reminded him of the seemingly endless nights dealing with Julianne's coughing fits. Almost every day, she'd wake up on a blood-stained pillow or sheet, and he'd have to buy new bedding. It was definitely annoying, but eventually it got to the point where the stains were the least of their concerns. They'd always talk about the extra sheets coming in handy once they had their first baby. That was it. All he ever wanted. A family. But as each day passed, the idea seemed to fade further into obscurity. It just wasn't realistic anymore. With no money, a job he could no longer find the joy in, and a relationship on the brink of ruin, he wondered what was left to look forward to. Julianne didn't seem to care about starting a family anymore, not as much as she cared about her butterflies. Everything seemed broken beyond repair. Foundations rotted, futures blemished. He pulled a fresh pillowcase from the shelf and could hear Julianne crying from the bedroom. He approached the door and leaned his ear against it. Every voice in his head told him to go in and talk to her, but he had no energy, no desire. Instead, he wrapped his hand, pulled his keys from his pocket, and hurried through the front door, slamming it in his wake. Three. Only 3 minutes remained until the bell would finally ring, signaling the end of the day. The students sat silently, a mass of shifting impatience and half-hearted sighs. Jeremiah's eyes were closed while he leaned his weight against the podium in the front of the classroom. He wasn't asleep, though he wished that he were. The students filed out as the bell rang, the door swinging open to reveal yet another gloomy, rainy afternoon. Several of his students said goodbye, though Jeremiah's eyes remained shut, his demeanor disengaged, and he said nothing. "Mr. Drake, are you okay?" Jeremiah opened his eyes to see Connor standing nearby. Yeah, great," Jeremiah muttered after clearing his throat. Connor took a step closer. "Well, you look like shit." Jeremiah wiped his eyes and stretched his arms out toward the ceiling, emitting a boisterous groan. Didn't sleep. Spent the night in a hotel." "Oh, shit. You and Julianne get in another fight?" Jeremiah laughed. "Yeah, a big one. I finally let her have it." "What happened?" "Well, I pretty much told her that I didn't care about anything anymore. My job, her job, myself. I even said I stopped caring about us. She locked the bedroom door and I left. Haven't been home since." "Are you going back tonight?" "I've honestly never considered sleeping in my classroom until today." Connor gagged. "Gross. I don't even want to think about all the cockroaches that come out at night." "Thanks for that. Now I have to go back home." "Which hotel did you stay at? Just go back for another night." "The Lazy Whale." Connor's eyes widened. "Never mind. You're better off sleeping in here. Cockroaches are probably friendlier than whatever the hell they've got infesting that place." Jeremiah smiled. "I know. And believe it or not, I barely had the money to get a room for one night." "That sucks, man. Hopefully things work out." Jeremiah caught a glimpse of the inside of Connor's backpack, some paper and a couple of small tin containers. "Hey, you have that new sketch in there or what?" Connor looked back at his bag and zipped it up with haste. "Oh, yeah, but it's not done yet. Probably by Wednesday. I'll show you then." He threw his bag over his shoulder and headed toward the classroom door. "I'm going home to finish it up. I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Drake." Caught off guard by Connor's sudden need to leave, Jeremiah didn't say anything back. The classroom door swung open, and he watched Connor hustle into the hallway, never looking back. From his open laptop, an alert notified him of an incoming email. Jeremiah sighed. I know, I didn't take attendance again," he whined. "Sue me." He stood from his stool, sauntered over to his desk, and read the subject line, "Attention, changes in bank statement." "What the hell is this?" he whispered to himself as he clicked the mouse with trembling fingers. The email opened to a short blurb of text. "Dear valued Orcasai Union account holder, this is an overdraft alert. Your account balance, negative $142.50. Overdraft fee, $50. A dull ache grew in the pit of Jeremiah's gut, clawed up his throat, and resounded through his teeth. Immediately, he opened a new tab and logged into his account to confirm the contents of the email. And it was true. The reality of the situation had begun to sink in, and he slammed his laptop shut. In a rapid blur of motion, he shoved it into his bag, grabbed his keys, and burst through the classroom door. Fellow teachers and students greeted him as they walked past, but Jeremiah ignored every word and rushed to the parking lot with a raging temper, his mind racing with abhorrent curses. He threw his belongings in the back seat got into his car, and bolted out of the parking lot. As he sped away from the high school and down Expenditure Drive, Jeremiah wove in and out of traffic, the speedometer climbing to almost 80 miles per hour, coming dreadfully close to clipping every car he drove past. His knuckles burned white as he clung to the steering wheel, and he started to laugh to himself as the rainfall became stronger. Given the situation, there was simply nothing left to do. The sound of blaring horns permeated the air around him, and the street seemed to narrow as he pressed harder on the gas. Pedestrians dove back towards the sidewalk to avoid being hit. He couldn't stop laughing. He questioned, why him? Out of all people, why did the universe have to put a target on his back? With the career he now loathed, a wife he could no longer stand to be around, and now an empty wallet and a bank account with nothing to his name, there was no way life could deal a lower blow. Jeremiah's phone, sitting on the passenger seat, alerted him with a new text message. With a quick glance to his right, he saw that the message was from Julianne. He picked up the phone. "You need to call me. We have to talk. There isn't much time." Shards of glass flew from all sides and everything became weightless when Jeremiah's car was thrust into the air. Two loud thumps as Jeremiah's head smacked into the steering wheel. The world turned crimson, and he screamed just before being knocked unconscious. His car rolled several more times before landing on the roof and skidding into a fire hydrant. The car's horn screamed into the afternoon sky as the metal cage finally came to a halt. An icy splash from the geyser collided with the undercarriage and jarred Jeremiah awake. Lying on his back against the asphalt, the sun peeked through the dark clouds and the rainfall gradually faded. He couldn't feel any pain. His head felt dull and foggy, like the world around him was muffled. Though his vision was blurry, he arched his head and looked forward. Indistinguishable people stood, watching him with their phones out to call for help or to film the scene. He wasn't sure.
Hey, buddy, are you okay?
"You all right, sir?" "I've got an ambulance on the way." "Damn, did you see how many times he flipped?" An indecipherable amount of time passed, marked by fading moments of consciousness. Eventually, after an eternity, or perhaps mere minutes, an ambulance arrived at the scene. Jeremiah was hoisted up onto a gurney. 3 paramedics ran beside the gurney, checking Jeremiah's vitals and tending to any wounds that they could. One of them began talking to Jeremiah. He was an older man with a full head of white hair. He was rather tall, with rigid stature. "Son, I need you to look at me. Can you give me some sort of sign you're coherent?" Jeremiah gave him the finger. The man smiled and laughed. Good. I've got to tell you, son, that was one of the worst accidents I've ever seen, and I've been doing this job for almost 20 years now. Besides a pretty bad cut on your head, you came out of that with only a few scratches. Honestly, you should be dead. You've got to be feeling pretty lucky right now." Jeremiah didn't respond. He scanned the paramedic some more. His uniform differed from the others, and it appeared brand new. While the others wore navy blue uniforms, this man's uniform was black, and he didn't have a name tag. There were no patches indicating who he worked for, or which hospital he might have been dispatched from. All he wore was a small, golden pin. Though he wasn't sure, it appeared to be in the shape of a small frog or lizard. As Jeremiah was lifted into the ambulance, the paramedic leaned over, getting closer to Jeremiah. "I think someone was watching over you, young man," he whispered. Jeremiah reached for the oxygen mask strapped around his head and took it off, gripping it with his right hand. He looked directly into the paramedic's eyes. The man's friendly demeanor melted away when he saw the stern expression on Jeremiah's face. "Why did you have to save me?" Jeremiah said. "The last thing I want is to see another day, another piece of shit, me against the world day. Just leave me here." Jeremiah, weak, closed his eyes and let his head fall back. The paramedic stopped and stood speechless. Concern mounted in the man's eyes as the two other paramedics climbed in and shut the ambulance doors. Through the windows on the double doors, the man stayed locked on Jeremiah as the ambulance turned on its sirens and raced back down Expenditure. From his breast pocket, the man pulled out a small black radio. "This is Anura Leader. Great Eye Team. We need to initiate an extensive watch on Jeremiah Drake, effective immediately. I'll need at least a dozen team members to my location, and based on the information I received a few hours ago on Mrs. Drake, let's go ahead and get a delivery to Orcaside General Hospital prepared just as a precaution. This one's pretty much a guarantee." 4. Jeremiah's eyes peeled open, revealing a dimly lit room. Nothing but bare white walls and silence, save for the muted telephones ringing from outside, a framed painting of an elderly man in a sailboat, and a steady pulsing blip coming from above. The sun peered through the tall blinds, and the air was annoyingly cold. He pulled the sheet closer to his face and reached for his forehead. A dull soreness expanded within his limbs with every move. He felt stitching and traced his fingertips over the tiny grooves along his scalp. It wasn't just the tenderness in his muscles. He felt fatigued, almost as though he'd been drained of energy. The door to the room swung open. "Jeremiah, how are you feeling?" Jeremiah groaned, staring at the ceiling. "Sore as hell. Who are you?" "I'll get to that in a minute. First, I need to know how your body's reacting to the medication. This is the first you've been awake since the accident." That voice. I'm fine. Just sore. Now, can you tell me who you are?" Jeremiah asked, still staring at the ceiling. "Jeremiah, it's me." Jeremiah paused and arched his head forward as much as he could. He saw a man standing in a white coat. He knew the voice sounded familiar. When he discovered who it was, he remembered that it was a voice he'd hoped to never hear again. "Dr. Stocks? Why are you here?" The soreness was prominent, but now he felt more queasy than anything else. Is Julianne here?" Jeremiah added. The blip remained steady. Jeremiah's head fell back on the pillow, his eyes fixed again on the ceiling. "She's here, Jeremiah. You'll get to see her in a few minutes. But please, you need to hear what I have to say." The room spun as Dr. Stocks kept talking. Jeremiah closed his eyes and concentrated on staying still. "Nothing I have to say is good news. I'm sure you've gathered that by me being here. But I want you to know that there's hope." Jeremiah kept quiet. "Julianne's latest scans from this morning shocked us. The cancer we thought was in remission has apparently taken new life. At this point, chemo won't do anyone any favors. We have to perform the surgery if we want any chance for her to make it, and it has to be now." No response from Jeremiah. "You understand what I'm telling you, right?" Dr. Stocks added. Jeremiah lifted his trembling arm and pointed at the window. "Doctor, can you please open the window? I need some fresh air." After some hesitation, Dr. Stocks walked toward the window and pulled back the blinds. He unfastened the latch and pulled the window open a few inches. "Thank you." Dr. Stocks grew impatient. He knelt down by Jeremiah's bedside and altered his tone. "Jeremiah, you have to talk to your wife right now. We can't wait any longer. She's scheduled to go into surgery in 25 minutes. There's no guarantee at this point you'll be able to talk with her afterwards. Please, I can't go into that room knowing you two didn't at least have the chance to say goodbye to each other." Jeremiah stared out the window, past Dr. Stocks, over his head, through his being. Every word of his drifted into the ether without anything to latch onto. A royal blue Atlantic backdrop silhouetted the Orcaside skyline in the distance. Gumball-colored billboards stretched as far as the eye could see. The blip remained steady. Dr. Stocks stood up and exited through the door. Was he mad? Did he even care? It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Not anymore. Jeremiah pulled back the stiff white comforter, ripped off his heart monitor, and placed his bare feet on the cold tile floor, struggling to stand. His inability to properly shift his weight caused his body to tip forward, but he had enough strength to stop himself by grabbing hold of the window ledge. Grunting as he pulled himself up, a soft breeze surprised him as his skin embraced the effulgence of the outside world. Jeremiah laughed to himself. Out of all days, today just had to be the most beautiful. Not a single rain cloud in sight. One last trip to the beach would have been nice, but that time had passed. Now, all there was left to do was drop. Balancing his naked feet on the narrow ledge, Jeremiah looked down. Crowds of shoppers flooded the sidewalk 8 stories below. The city was alive. It was loud, chaotic, a cacophony of consumerism. No one suspected a thing. No one on the street was prepared for what was about to happen. Jeremiah wondered if he'd be lucky enough to black out before even hitting the ground, but it didn't seem likely. He probably wasn't up high enough. Trying to get to the roof would be too much work. It wasn't worth trying to evade all the questions and resistance from hospital employees and Good Samaritans. And the last thing he wanted was to end up on the news for his parents to see, for his students to see. Regardless, he knew that jumping from here would get the job done. Julianne intercepted his focus as he shifted toward the Atlantic. Her smile, her eyes, oceans of blue. Everything that had been done to fight the cancer was nothing more than an apparent waste of time. And saying goodbye wasn't anything he wanted to do, not anymore. He's made his peace with her. He had already revealed his truths. This world had become nothing but a burden. All passion had been erased. All compassion had been depleted. Saying goodbye had no weight to it, no meaning. He compared the feeling to his own existence, and with that thought, Jeremiah stuck his right leg over the ledge, over the blur of the crowded street below. A loud knock at the door startled him, and he recoiled his leg back inside of the window, grasping onto the wall with both hands. Jeremiah turned to face the inside of the hospital room, waiting for the door to open, but no one came in. Curiosity got the best of him as he kneeled on the ledge, bringing both of his feet back inside and onto the cold tile floor. He rushed back into bed and reattached his heart monitor, ready to act as if nothing had happened. After another knock, a few seconds passed before a mysterious man entered the room. He wasn't part of the hospital staff, being that he was covered in black from head to toe. His wardrobe rang familiar, however, when Jeremiah spotted a shiny pin on the breast pocket. It was just like the paramedics, gold and shaped like a small frog. The man had very broad shoulders and was easily over 6.5 feet tall. His muscular build was impressive for the man's age, who looked to be well into his 60s. He was carrying what looked to be some kind of helmet, black in color, reflective, with 2 alarmingly white, circular eyes. He sat the helmet at the foot of Jeremiah's bed and smiled. "Who are you?" Jeremiah asked, sitting up. "The name's Ascari, but you can call me Frank," the man replied. His voice was gentle, with a slight rasp. "Okay, what's with the outfit, Frank? And why are there so many other people wearing this creepy getup around town?" Frank laughed. "I assume you're referring to the pin." "Actually, it's the black trench coat, but sure, that too." "I'm part of a pretty special group, Jeremiah." Jeremiah swallowed at the mention of his name. "And we've been keeping our eye on you for a while now, ever since Julianne had her initial diagnosis and you swallowed all those pills." Jeremiah's eyes widened.
Excuse me? How do you know about that?
You've been prone to this kind of behavior since you were in your teens, and it seems to have resurfaced during the past couple of years. Let's just say we've noticed. Jeremiah sat up slightly.
You need to explain what all this is right now, or I'm going to pick up this phone and call the police.
Jeremiah reached for the phone on the table by his bed, but the man showed no signs of trepidation. Jeremiah paused, and the man continued to speak. We are the children of Anura. We possess the ability to sense those on the brink of ending their own lives, which allows us to monitor them more closely, giving us ample time to put a stop to the act itself if it were to reach that point. Jeremiah sat speechless, waiting for further explanation. He withdrew his hand from reaching for the phone. You see, my brother Josh and I both fought during Vietnam. He had been captured twice by the enemy. Both times he was able to escape, thankfully. It was narrow, but he got out alive. After we were called to come back home, things were different. He hardly slept. He hardly ate. All he did was look out the window during the day with dead eyes and scream at the top of his lung as soon as he got the chance to fall asleep at night. He had been a prisoner of his own mind. One night, his room was dead silent. This was irregular, so I went in to check on him. When I'd opened the door, I saw that he was hanging from a belt inside of his closet. The same dead eyes looked back at me. The truth was, he never came back home at all. All I wanted was to be with him, so I took my revolver and stuck it in my mouth. I pulled the trigger, but I'd forgotten that it wasn't loaded. I dropped it and cried myself to sleep. The next morning, I found this at the foot of my bed, Frank explained, looking down at the black helmet on Jeremiah's bed. I was skeptical at first, but I couldn't help but wonder what it did or where it came from. So I put it on. The experience was unlike anything I'd ever imagined. What is it? What is it? What does it do? Jeremiah asked. To put it simply, it wakes you up. It gives you a taste of what it's like to be on the other side of your pain. It gives you the courage to push yourself past everything that's clouding your vision. Because the truth is, when you don't have anybody to pull you out of chaos, you need something more. This was my something more. Jeremiah lifted his body up and reached for the helmet, gripping it with both hands. The glowing white eyes stared back at him as he gradually fell back against his pillow. Then, after I took it off, I felt something new, Frank continued. I felt tremendous pain, but it wasn't my own. The pain was outside of my body, floating all around me. I could see it. It was the pain of others. I could see their thoughts. I could see what was creating the pain. And that's when I discovered my ability, my gift. That night, on my nightstand, I found this golden pin and this note, he said, handing Jeremiah a card. Jeremiah turned the card over in the palm of his hand. In chaos, sensibility is fleeting. Anura has chosen you for regeneration.
This is something,
Jeremiah said, tossing the card on the bed, looking back at the helmet in his lap, the condescension in his voice palpable.
So, what do you want me to do? Put this on? Or what?
The choice is yours, Jeremiah.
Yes, exactly. Because it's my life. You and your group of weirdos have no right to come in and manipulate people with this terrifying contraption. If a person wants to take their own life, they have the autonomy to do so. If someone wants to live, they'll make the choice on their own.
If only it were that simple, Jeremiah. Some merely do not possess the strength to see outside of their own suffering. That's why we exist. All children of Anura were once just like you. We all, at one point, were lost in our own chaos, ready to end it without taking another breath. Then Anura saved us, just as it will you. Let us save you. Allow yourself to be saved. Join us in our effort to remind the lost how precious life can be.
Jeremiah shook his head, shifting his perspective once again towards the Orcasai skyline through the open window. The blip remained steady. Leave me alone, please. Tell your crew that they don't need to monitor me anymore. In a few minutes, there won't be anyone left to watch over. Sorry, but you failed.
Frank hung at the edge of his bed for a moment, then turned to the door. We'll be waiting, he said before exiting the room. And so will those that need your guidance. A breeze rolled in from outside, and something caught Jeremiah's eye at the foot of the bed. He put the helmet to the side, reached forward, and grabbed the object in question, a golden pin in the shape of a frog. Turning the pin over between his thumb and index finger, Jeremiah pondered the idea of putting the helmet on. Was it true? Was it possible? If it were, what would it be like? What would it feel like? Regardless, it was wrong. Manipulation. Nothing short of a 21st century lobotomy. Despite his opposition, however, he continued to wrestle with curiosity. He stood up from the bed and walked towards the open window, setting the pin on the windowsill. Poking his head outside, he looked down at the herds of shoppers, every single person on a different path, on a different journey, some perfectly content with their existences, others apathetic to the idea of what's to come, and many were just like him, lost within their own chaos, as Frank had put it. The sound of the busy shoppers became eclipsed by the crashing Atlantic waves in the distance. Onto the windowsill, a butterfly landed, with translucent royal blue wings fluttering against the sun. Jeremiah locked eyes with it as it bobbed its body along the ledge, both wings folding perfectly against one another. Taken aback by its presence, Jeremiah walked backwards toward the bed and sat on the edge of the stiff mattress. The blip steadily grew more rapid. He ripped off the heart monitor and tossed it to the floor, looking back at the helmet as the room fell silent. Jeremiah locked onto the glowing abysses, held captive by the pulsing spirals of white. Five. Sitting alone in his father's station wagon, parked in a small suburban neighborhood just outside of the city, Jeremiah heaved a sigh, removed his tie, and tossed it in the back seat. The conversation he had just had with Julianne was painful. Necessary, but painful. Never in 1,000 years did he think he'd lose her. Yes, it was her choice to walk away, but a choice that Jeremiah had to learn to accept. There were so many things he'd said that he wished he could take back, but it was no use walking through his regrets yet again. That fight in the kitchen was all she needed to make her decision. It was true. Just as she had told him in that moment, he was not the man she married. There was no, "I love you." There wasn't even a slight glance of endearment. His own words reverberated through his mind. "I don't give a shit. I just want to be left the hell alone." Though the words might have felt genuine at the time, it couldn't have been further from the truth.
He was lost, in disarray, out of sorts, not himself. Whatever excuse he could think of, it wasn't enough to justify any of the things he'd said to her. But there was a kind of grace he pulled from that argument, something he'd mentioned to her before he left. He'd admired the passion in her heart, even if that passion was fueled by indignation toward him. She was the kind of woman he'd always dreamed of being with, the strong kind, the kind that never let anything get in the way of her ambition, but most of all, the kind with enough compassion to make a man transform himself. He always cherished the love they had built together, and somewhere in the recesses of his heart, he hoped that Julianne recognized his pain as merely a phase in time, a blip in reality that pulled him away from sensibility and reason, a passing wave of looming strife that would give way to a calming current, leading to the bank of a stream where he could pause, look into himself, and rediscover that adoration for life he had abandoned along the way. He had become a stranger in his own home, distracted by the superfluous, by the pursuit of greed, and blind to the idea of celebrating the wonderful victories that had come his way. But under the surface, he knew it had all stemmed from a birthplace of altruism, mutated by the combination of misguided self-righteousness and the debilitating need for recognition, for acceptance and acknowledgement, not only from others, but from himself. Jeremiah knew he'd find himself one day. That was something he could accept. That sentiment alone was enough to warrant the separation from Julianne, and if he were to find himself lucky enough to be with her again, he would do anything in his power to maintain order. Jeremiah pulled the golden necklace from his shirt pocket, Julianne's favorite. He never asked her if he could keep it. He took it when the doctor gave him her belongings once she was wheeled out of surgery. Jeremiah never bothered to tell her. Sitting in the driver's seat, he traced his fingers along the necklace, across the white pearls, leading to the golden butterfly that dangled from the latch at the end. He laid the necklace atop the dashboard and reached into his pocket once more. From it, he removed Frank's golden pin. From across the street, coming from what sounded like the inside of a home, someone was shouting,
"Shut my door! I'm not on drugs, okay? Just leave me the hell alone!"
A door slammed, and Jeremiah, with the pin in hand, shifted his focus to the open window across the street. Sitting on his bed with his backpack, Connor wiped the tears from his eyes. He unzipped his backpack and pulled out a small silver tin. Jeremiah monitored Connor from the driver's seat, leaning back to avoid being seen. Connor rolled up the sleeve of his shirt, revealing a mulberry abscess on his forearm. Connor opened the tin, removed a syringe, shut the window, and closed the blinds. Jeremiah closed his eyes, turned forward, and his gut sank. When he opened them, he saw Julianne's necklace glimmering against the sun. He glanced back at the golden pin in his hand and placed it beside the necklace on the dash. Both items gleamed before him, each possessing a particular notion of significance, neither of which he could properly prioritize. Memories of Connor flooded his mind. On the first day of his sophomore year, Connor could not stop complimenting Jeremiah's classroom. The superhero posters, the movie posters, the artwork, Connor loved it all and was a fan of Jeremiah's since day one, and vice versa. Connor was always a happy kid, always volunteering in class, always showing off his artistic skills, and that smile, it was unforgettable, contagious. He was a straight A student with a great deal of compassion and an open mind, the kind of kid an educator hoped all their students would turn out to be. Then, his junior year came around, and everything changed. Just as it had for Jeremiah. Almost simultaneously, Connor's parents divorced and Julianne was diagnosed with lung cancer. And here they both were, on the other side of heartache, still caught in the tangles of chaos, lost in the darkness, where sensibility is fleeting. Frank's words echoed within Jeremiah's bones as he turned back to the black helmet sitting in the back seat, taunting him, just as it did at the foot of his hospital bed days before. The glowing white eyes beckoned him.
It wakes you up. It gives you a taste of what it's like to be on the other side of your pain. It gives you the courage to push yourself past everything that's clouding your vision. Because the truth is, when you don't have anybody to pull you out of the chaos, you need something more.
With the turn of the key, Jeremiah shut off the car.
Join us in our effort to remind the lost how precious life can be.
He reached for the dash, lingered between the necklace and the pin, and Julianne's words intercepted his focus.
Apparently, all you'd rather do is die alone in this awful place we built together. I really hope you can find something that gives you the strength to help push yourself past this, because you are not the man I married.
Jeremiah exited the station wagon, making his way toward Connor's home, the gold in his hand, sparkling in the sunlight.